The day began like any other for Sundar Pichai. He was sitting quietly in the corner booth of a small café in downtown San Francisco. The kind of place where no one expected the CEO of one of the biggest tech companies in the world to walk in. The smell of freshly brewed coffee floated through the air, and the faint hum of conversation surrounded him. He had chosen this place because it was quiet, far from the sterile walls of corporate boardrooms, and because he needed a few moments to think. Lately, he had been carrying something heavy on his mind, something that even his closest colleagues didn't know. In his jacket pocket, wrapped carefully in a piece of soft cloth, was a small silver ring. It wasn't just any ring. It was his mother's. She had worn it for decades before she passed it on to him. The ring wasn't worth much in money, but its value to Sundar was beyond anything he could measure. It was the kind of keepsake you couldn't replace, not with all the wealth in the world. Whenever he touched it, memories of his childhood came flooding back. His mother sitting at their kitchen table in Chennai. Her gentle smile, her stories about hope even when life was hard. He wore the ring on a chain around his neck, under his shirt, close to his heart. He was stirring his coffee absent-mindedly when a young waitress approached his table. She had a warm smile, but there was something in her eyes and exhaustion that no amount of makeup could hide. Her hair was tied back loosely, and her uniform looked slightly worn. Still, she moved with a quiet grace, balancing a tray effortlessly. "Good morning," she said softly, placing a glass of water in front of him before taking his order. But as she turned to leave, her eyes caught a small glint of silver just peeking from under the collar of his shirt. Her steps slowed. She tilted her head slightly, her brows knitting together. "Excuse me, sir," she said cautiously as if she wasn't sure she should say anything. "I couldn't help but notice that ring you're wearing. My mom has one just like it." The words hit Sundar in an unexpected way. His fingers instinctively reached for the ring, holding it as if it might vanish. He looked up at her, searching her face for anything that might explain how she could recognize it. "Your mom?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "What does it look like?" "It's silver, kind of old," she said, her voice carrying a strange mix of certainty and hesitation. "It has these little engraved lines along the sides. She's had it for as long as I can remember. She always said it was given to her by someone special. She never told me who. But I swear yours looks exactly the same." For a moment, Sundar felt like the world had gone quiet around them. The clinking of cups, the low chatter, even the hiss of the coffee machine seemed to fade. His mother had told him that the ring was one of a kind, a family piece passed down through generations. The idea that someone else could have someone unrelated made no sense. He wanted to ask more questions, but something in the waitress's expression stopped him. She seemed almost protective, as if the mention of her mother she wasn't ready to share. "What's your mother's name?" Sundar asked gently. The waitress hesitated, glancing around as if to make sure no one was listening. "Her name is Annika," she said finally. She doesn't live around here anymore." Sundar froze. Annika was a name he hadn't heard in decades, not since his teenage years. Back then, Annika had been a close friend of his mother's. She had disappeared suddenly one summer, and no one in the neighborhood knew why. Sundar remembered the whispers, the theories. Some said she moved abroad. Others claimed she had run away from something. His mother never spoke about her again. "Where is she now?" he asked. His voice low. The waitress looked down, fidgeting with the edge of her order pad. "I don't really know," she admitted. "Don't talk much. Things between us are complicated." There was a pause, and Sundar sensed there was more to her story, something hidden under layers of errant. But before he could press further, another customer called for her. She excused herself quickly, leaving Sundar staring into his coffee, his mind now a whirlpool of questions. He tried to focus on his thoughts, but they kept circling back to one thing. How did her mother have the same ring? And why did the name Annika stir such a deep unease in his chest? When the waitress returned with his food, Sundar noticed her hands trembling slightly as she set the plate down. "Thank you," he said quietly, watching her closely. She nodded but avoided his gaze. It's just weird, you know? She said after a moment, seeing that ring. My mom always told me it was a symbol of trust. She said if I ever met someone who wore it, it meant they were connected to her somehow. Connected how? Sundar asked, leaning forward. But she shook her head, her eyes darkening. I don't know. Maybe she never meant for me to find out, but, sir, if you ever meet her, please be careful. Those words stayed with him long after he left the cafe. As he stepped outside, the cool morning air felt different, sharper, heavier. He looked down at the ring, the sunlight glinting off its surface. This wasn't just a coincidence. It couldn't be. He took a deep breath, already sensing that whatever this was, it wasn't going to be simple. There were stories buried here, stories that had been hidden for years, and something told him that finding the truth about the ring, the waitress, and her mother would lead him down a path he wasn't prepared for. But he also knew one thing with certainty. He couldn't walk away now. Still. He didn't realize yet just how dangerous the truth would be. And as he turned the corner, he didn't see the shadow that had been watching him from across the street. Asterisk Sundar walked slowly down the street, his thoughts tangled like a knot he couldn't untie. The air felt heavier than before, each step echoing in his mind with the same question. How could the waitress's mother have the same ring? His fingers brushed against the small silver band under his shirt again, almost as if to make sure it was still there, still his. He crossed the road, not noticing the figure who lingered in the distance, partially hidden behind a street vendor's cart. The stranger's eyes followed his every move, but Sundar's mind was too clouded to sense the weight of that gaze. As he walked, fragments of old memories returned. He was a boy again, sitting on the narrow balcony of his childhood home in Chennai. His mother was sewing by the light of a single bulb, and next to her sat Annika, slightly older, with a quiet confidence that made her stand out. She had been a constant presence in their home for months. She laughed with his mother, helped with the cooking, and sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, she would take out a small silver ring from her pocket and turn it in her hands. As though it held a secret. Then, without warning, she disappeared. No goodbye. No explanation. Only whispers in the neighborhood that she had been hiding from someone. The sudden honk of a car pulled Sundar out of his thoughts. He realized he had walked further than he planned. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was his assistant reminding him of a board meeting in 2 hours. Normally, Sundar would have gone straight back to his office, but something about the way the waitress had looked at him, half curious, half afraid, made him turn around. He found himself walking back toward the CAFE acute. Inside. The morning rush was over. The waitress was wiping down a table near the window. She looked up when she saw him, her expression caught between surprise and hesitation. Back so soon? She asked softly. I need to ask you something, Sundar said, keeping his tone gentle but firm. About your mother, Annika. When was the last time you saw her? The waitress glanced toward the kitchen before answering, as if to make sure they were alone. A year ago, she said slowly. She came to see me after being gone. For months. She didn't say where she had been. She just told me to stay away from certain people. She was scared. Scared of what? She hesitated, then shook her head. I don't know. But she gave me an envelope before she left. Told me not to open it unless something happened to her. Do you still have it? The waitress bit her lip, clearly debating with herself. Yes, but it's not here. It's at my apartment. And I don't even know if I should be showing it to you. Sundar understood her reluctance. He wasn't a stranger to secrets, especially ones that could change everything. I think your mother wanted you to keep it safe for a reason, he said. And if she has the same ring as me, then whatever is inside that envelope, it might explain why. For a moment, she studied his face as if searching for any sign of dishonesty. Finally, she nodded. Fine. After my shift, I can take you. There, but we have to be careful. I've seen people watching me lately. The words made Sundar's stomach tighten. Watching you? She leaned closer, lowering her voice. Yes, sometimes outside my apartment. Sometimes even when I'm working. I don't know who they are. I thought maybe it was my imagination. But last week I saw a man following me after work. Sundar didn't say it out loud, but he couldn't ignore the prickling feeling on the back of his neck. Maybe it was coincidence, or maybe not. They agreed to meet after her shift. Until then, Sundar had time to prepare for the possibility that this was bigger than just a coincidence about a ring. When evening came, he met her outside the café. The streets were quieter now, the fading light casting long shadows. They walked in silence, the sound of their footsteps echoing against the pavement. Halfway to her apartment, Sundar noticed a dark car parked on the side of the street. The same car seemed to appear again a block later, this time creeping forward slowly. The waitress noticed too. That's the car, she whispered, her grip tightening around her bag, the one I told you about. Before Sundar could respond, the car sped up and turned sharply into a side street, disappearing from sight. But the unease it left behind was impossible to shake out. Her apartment was small, neat, but filled with signs of someone living, with caution locks reinforced on the door, curtains pulled tight, and a small security camera mounted above the entrance. She went straight to a drawer in her bedroom and pulled out a plain brown envelope. This is it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sundar took it carefully. It felt heavier than he expected. On the front, written in a handwriting that made his heart skip, were 3 words: trust only him. He stared at it for a long moment before looking back at the waitress. Do you know who him is? She shook her head. No, but my mom said I'd know when the time came. Sundar's hands itched to open it right there, but something in his gut told him this wasn't the place. We'll read it somewhere safe, he said firmly. But before they could leave, the faint sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside her door, slow, deliberate, and far too close. The waitress's eyes widened, and Sundar felt his heartbeat quicken. Someone was out there, and whoever it was. They weren't just passing by. Asterisk, the sound of those footsteps in the hallway seemed to grow heavier. Each one deliberate, almost dragging against the old wooden floorboards. Sundar and the waitress exchanged a quick glance, both of them frozen in place, as if moving might draw more attention. The air in the apartment felt suddenly thick, like the walls had shifted closer. The waitress, her name was Lena, Sundar now, remembered, slowly set the envelope down on the bed, her hands trembling so much that the paper crinkled under her touch. That's not my neighbor, she whispered, her voice so faint it was almost lost to the creak of the floor outside. Sundar felt his pulse in his throat. He had been in high-pressure situations before, negotiations worth billions, speeches, in front of thousands, but there was something different about this moment. This wasn't business, this was personal. And the unknown danger on the other side of the door made it feel all too real. He moved silently toward the entrance, his eyes scanning the small space for anything he could use if it came to confrontation. His gaze landed on a heavy lamp in the corner. It wasn't much, but it would do if things got bad. He unplugged it quietly, careful not to let the cord scrape the floor. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. For a moment there was only silence, the kind that made your ears ring. Then came a soft, almost polite knock. 3 slow taps. Lena's eyes darted to him, wide with fear. Don't answer it, she mouthed, but whoever was outside didn't seem like they were going to leave. After a pause, the knock came again, harder this time. Sundar's instincts screamed at him to keep quiet. They waited, holding their breath. Eventually the footsteps started again, moving past the door and fading down the hall. Only when they could no longer hear them did Lena finally exhale, her body sagging against the wall. We can't stay here, Sundar said, his voice steady, but low. It's not safe. She nodded quickly. I know a place, she said. It's not far. We can read the letter there. Within minutes, they were out the door, the envelope safely tucked inside Sundar's jacket. The night air outside was cold, and the streetlights flickered as they walked. Sundar kept glancing behind them, scanning for movement. Lena led him to a small, dimly lit laundromat that seemed almost abandoned. The hum of the washing machines was the only sound, and the warm, soapy air felt oddly comforting after the tension of the apartment. My friend owns this place, Lena explained quietly. He lets me come here when I need to be alone. No one asked questions. They sat at a small folding table in the corner. Sundar pulled the envelope from his jacket and placed it between them. For a long moment, neither of them touched it. Finally, Lena reached for it, her fingers brushing against his. Are you ready? She asked. He nodded, though he wasn't sure he truly was. She tore the top of the envelope with slow, deliberate movements, as if afraid of what they might find. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, worn and yellowed at the edges. Lena unfolded it carefully, and the faint scent of something old, dust, maybe, or faded perfume drifted into the air. The handwriting was unmistakable to Sundar. It was his mother's. The first line made his breath catch. If you are reading this, it means the truth can no longer stay hidden. Lena's brow furrowed. This is your mother's writing? Yes, Sundar said softly, his voice almost breaking. But why would my mother send a letter to your mom? They read on together. The letter spoke of a promise made years ago, a secret agreement between two women who had once trusted each other with their lives. It mentioned the ring repeatedly, describing it as a key, though not to a door or a lock, but to the truth about what happened in 1995. Lena's eyes scanned faster now, her breath quickening. This says there's something hidden, and it's not just about the ring, it's about a betrayal. Before Sundar could respond, a sound broke through the quiet hum of the laundromat, the faint jingle of the doorbell at the entrance. They both froze. A man stood in the doorway, his face partially hidden by a baseball cap pulled low. His hands were in his pockets, but his posture was tense. He didn't move further inside. Instead, he simply looked at them for a long, unsettling moment, and smiled. Then he stepped back, and the door closed behind him. Lena's hands clutched the letter tighter. That's the same man who followed me last week, she whispered. Sundar's mind raced. Whoever this was, he wasn't just curious. He was watching them. And now, he knew exactly where they were. Asterisk, the sound of the laundromat's door, shutting, echoed in Sundar's chest, like a warning bell. Lena was still gripping the letter so tightly that the edges bent under her fingers, her knuckles pale. The hum of the washing machine seemed louder now, the steady rhythmic spin almost mocking in its normalcy. Sundar's gaze stayed fixed on the glass door, half expecting the man in the baseball cap to walk right back in. But minutes passed, and he didn't. The silence between Sundar and Lena was thick. Neither of them spoke for several long breaths, each one weighed down by the same question. Was he gone, or was he waiting? Finally, Sundar stood. Stay here, he said quietly. No. Lena's voice was sharp, laced with fear. You don't know what he wants. If you go out there, and if we stay here, we're just sitting targets. He cut in gently but firmly. I'll just check. 2 minutes. He walked toward the glass door, every step careful. Outside, the street was dimly lit, shadows stretching unnaturally under the flickering streetlights. He scanned both directions. The man was nowhere in sight, but Sundar had the distinct feeling that absence didn't mean safety. When he returned to the table, Lena's hands were trembling as she unfolded the letter again. We have to finish reading it, she said. If my mom and your mom risked something to write this, we need to know why. Sundar nodded. They leaned over the paper together. The next lines of the letter were heavier, the strokes of the pen darker, as if his mother had pressed harder in her. Writing. The ring is one of two, yours and mine. Together, they unlocked the truth about the night in December 1995. We swore never to tell anyone until it was safe. But it will never be safe. And if you're reading this, it means they've found us, or they will soon. Breath caught. The night in December 1995. I wasn't even born yet. Sundar's mind was already racing back through his own memories. 1995. He was still in school then, just beginning to think about his future. But he remembered something strange, his mother leaving abruptly one evening, not telling him where she was going, and returning hours later looking pale and unsettled. She never spoke of it again. The letter continued. Someone betrayed us. Someone close. If the wrong people get both rings, everything we protected will be gone. And so we dot the words, chilled Sundar. This wasn't about sentimental jewelry anymore. This was about something larger, something that had required secrecy for decades. Lena glanced at him, her eyes wide. Do you think that man outside is one of them? I don't know, Sundar admitted. But I think whoever he is, he's not alone. As if to punctuate his words, a sudden sound shattered the laundromat's fragile calm, a loud crash from outside. Both of them jumped, the letter slipping from Lena's hands onto the table. Sundar moved quickly to the door, peering out at the far end of the street. The dark car they'd noticed earlier was parked under a broken streetlight. One of its doors was open, and two figures stood beside it, speaking in low voices. Sundar couldn't see their faces clearly, but the way they kept glancing toward the laundromat was enough to set his instincts on high alert. We can't stay, Sundar said, turning back to Lena. We need to move, now. She grabbed the letter, folding it and slipping it into her jacket pocket. Where can we go? Somewhere they won't expect, he said, asterisk. They slipped out the back door of the laundromat into a narrow alley. The walls on either side were lined with dumpsters and graffiti, the air heavy with the scent of damp concrete. Sundar led the way, his mind working fast. Do you trust me? He asked over his shoulder. Lena hesitated, then nodded. Yes. I don't have much choice, do I? They reached the far end of the alley and merged into a busier street, blending with the few pedestrians still out this late. Sundar kept his head down, scanning reflections in shop windows for any sign of the men from the car. Eventually, they reached a small, nondescript building wedged between two closed shops. Sundar fished a key from his wallet and unlocked the door. Inside was a modest apartment, one of several safe places he kept in the city for moments when he needed privacy away from the corporate world. We'll be safe here for tonight, he said, locking the door behind them. Lena sank onto the couch, finally letting out a shaky breath. What do you think happened in 1995? She asked. Sundar didn't answer right away. He poured them both glasses of water, then sat opposite her. Whatever it was, our mothers thought it was dangerous enough to hide for almost 30 years. And now, someone wants it badly enough to follow you. That tells me one thing, it's not just a family secret. It's something worth chasing. Lena looked down at her hands. Do you think my mom's still alive? He hesitated. If she is, finding the truth about that night might be the only way to reach her. A sudden vibration from Sundar's phone cut through the moment. It was a text from an unknown number. Stop asking questions about 1995, or you'll regret it. His eyes stayed on the screen, but his mind was already on the next move, because he knew now whoever they were up against wasn't going to stop. And neither was he. Asterisk. The text on Sundar's phone glowed in the dim light of the safe apartment, the words heavy with an unspoken threat. Stop asking questions about 1995, or you'll regret it. He stared at it for several seconds, the weight of its warning sinking deeper than he wanted to admit. Lena leaned forward on the couch, her voice almost a whisper. Who sent that? No idea, he said, setting the phone face down on the table. But they know exactly what we're doing, which means we have less time than we thought. Lena shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the locked door. What if they're watching us right now? He followed her gaze, his own unease growing. We'll assume they are, and we'll act accordingly. He stood and began pacing the small space, his mind working in overdrive. The letter's mention of December 1995 kept looping in his head, refusing to leave him alone. There had to be a place, an event, something from that time that connected both their mothers and the rings. Then it hit him. Something faint, like a photograph half remembered. There was a factory, he said suddenly. An old textile factory on the outskirts of Chennai. My mother used to go there sometimes. I never understood why. She always said it was for helping a friend. Lena's eyes lit with recognition. My mom talked about a factory too. She said she once worked there when she was young, but something happened. Something she could never talk about. That was enough for Sundar. We're going there, he said. Lena frowned. But it's been decades. What if it's gone? If it's gone, he replied, then whatever they were hiding might still be buried there. And if it's not, he let the thought trail off, the implication clear. They agreed to leave before dawn, hoping the early hour would give them a head start on anyone following. The night passed slowly, each sound from the street making Lena tense and each creak of the old building reminding Sundar that safety was temporary. By the time the first light of morning crept through the blinds, they were ready. Sundar wore a plain jacket and cap, hoping to draw as little attention as possible. Lena carried a small backpack with the letter, some water, and a flashlight, her hands clutching the straps like they were lifelines. The journey to the factory was long and quiet. The city gave way to open stretches of road, the hum of traffic replaced by the distant call of birds. When they finally reached the outskirts, the building loomed ahead like a giant shadow from another time. The factory's once tall walls were now weathered and cracked, its windows boarded or shattered. Weeds grew high along its perimeter, swallowing what had once been a driveway. This place feels wrong, Lena murmured as they stepped out of the car. Sundar felt it too. The air was thick with the smell of rust and damp earth. And somewhere in the distance, a piece of loose metal clanged rhythmically in the wind. They pushed open a side door that hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, dust hung in the air like a fine mist. The floor was littered with scraps of fabric and broken machinery. Every footstep echoed too loudly, bouncing off the empty walls. My mom said there was a room, Lena said, her voice barely above a whisper. Hidden, behind a wall or something. They searched methodically, moving from one darkened corridor to the next. In one room, they found rows of old sewing machines, their metal frames eaten by rust. In another, stacks of rotting wooden crates, filled with fabric that crumbled up a touch. Then, in the farthest corner of the factory, Sundar found a section of wall that didn't quite match the rest. The paint was fresher, the bricks newer. He ran his fingers along it, feeling for gaps. Here, he said, pointing to a small, almost invisible seam. Lena joined him, her pulse quickening. Together they pushed. At first, nothing happened. Then, with a low groan, a narrow panel slid open, revealing a dark space barely wide enough for one person to slip through. Inside was a small room, no more than a storage closet, but the air was cooler, untouched by time. Against the back wall stood a metal trunk, its surface coated in dust. Sundar knelt and wiped it clean enough to see the lock, a lock shaped exactly like the engraving on the rings. Lena's voice trembled. So, the rings really are keys. He removed his mother's ring from the chain around his neck and pressed it into the slot. It turned smoothly, and with a soft click, the lock released. Inside, they found stacks of old documents, photographs, and a single sealed package wrapped in brown paper. Sundar reached for it, but Lena grabbed his wrist. Wait, what if it's dangerous? He hesitated. The thought had crossed his mind, but curiosity outweighed fear. He tore away the paper to reveal a videotape. Neither of them spoke for several seconds, both staring at the outdated cassette. A strip of masking tape across it bore 3 words. In faded ink, December 14th, 1995. Before they could react, the sharp crunch of footsteps on gravel echoed from outside the factory. Sundar's head snapped toward the sound. Lena's eyes widened in panic. They weren't alone. Asterisk, the sound of footsteps outside the factory was slow and deliberate, crunching over gravel like a clock, ticking down to something inevitable. Sundar's heart pounded in his ears. Lena's grip on the videotape tightened, her knuckles whitening as if she thought sheer force could keep the danger away. The room they had found, the hidden chamber, suddenly felt much smaller, the walls pressing in on them. Sundar quickly closed the metal trunk, sliding the lock back into place. He slipped the videotape into Lena's backpack and zipped it shut. Stay behind me, he whispered, his voice calm, but edged with urgency. The footsteps grew louder, moving toward the side door they had entered. Sundar guided Lena back through the narrow panel in the wall, sliding it closed until only the faintest seam was visible. They pressed themselves against the shadows of the corridor, listening. The side door creaked open. A pair of voices floated inside, low, male, and speaking in a language Sundar couldn't quite make out. One voice was sharp, authoritative. The other was quieter, more hesitant, but both carried the weight of people who knew exactly what they were looking for. Sundar and Lena moved silently along the corridor, keeping close to the wall. Every step felt like a gamble. The factory was so empty that even the softest scuff of a shoe could betray them. They reached the main sewing hall, its vast space littered with rusted machines and broken tables. Sundar crouched behind one of the larger machines, pulling Lena down with him. From their hiding place, they saw the two men enter the hall. One of them, the man in the baseball cap from the laundromat, swept his flashlight slowly across the room, the beam slicing through the dust-filled air. "They're here," he said flatly. The other man gave a short, cold laugh. "Then let's make this easy." They began moving between the rows of machines, their pace deliberate, methodical. Sundar's mind raced. There was no way they could get back to the car without being seen. The only chance was to find another exit one the men didn't know about. He tapped Lena's arm and pointed toward a far corner, where a stack of crates reached nearly to the ceiling. Behind those crates, he remembered glimpsing a door earlier, probably an old loading dock. Lena nodded, her breathing shallow but steady. Asterisk, they moved in quick. Crouched steps, keeping the crates and shadows between them and the intruders. Each moment stretched painfully long. Every second, an opportunity for a discovery. When they reached the far wall, Sundar pressed his shoulder against the old door. It resisted at first, then gave way with a reluctant groan. They slipped outside into blinding daylight, the sudden brightness momentarily disorienting after the factory's gloom. But they didn't stop moving. They kept low, weaving between the remains of old shipping containers until they reached the outer fence. A section of it sagged where the metal had rusted through. Sundar bent it just enough for Lena to crawl under, then followed her out into the open field beyond. They didn't speak until they were back in the car. Engine running, and the factory was shrinking in the rearview mirror. "We have to see what's on the tape," Lena said, her voice shaking not from fear now, but from a fierce determination. "I know a place." Sundar replied. He drove them to a friend's media restoration studio, a small, secure space filled with outdated technology. Inside, they set the tape into an old player, the machine whirring as it began to spin. The screen flickered, then cleared. What appeared made both of them lean forward. It was a grainy recording of a large room filled with people workers from the factory. Their faces were tired, their clothes worn. A date stamp in the corner read 14 Dec 1995. The camera panned slowly, then stopped on two women standing near the back, his mother and Lena's mother. They were younger, but unmistakable. The two women were speaking urgently to a small group. Their voices low, but the tone unmistakably serious. Sundar turned up the volume. "We have to hide the documents," his mother's voice said. "If they find out we have proof, they'll shut this place down and ruin everyone's lives." Lena's mother nodded. "The rings will keep them safe. One for you, one for me. No one will connect them unless they know the whole story." The camera shifted, revealing a man in the doorway, his face partially shadowed, but his build and posture unmistakable. It was the same man in the baseball cap, only younger. He stood there, watching, before stepping forward. "You shouldn't be doing this," his voice said coldly. "You're going to regret it." The video ended abruptly, the screen going dark. Lena sat back, her breath unsteady. They were protecting something, proof of something illegal. That's why they disappeared. That's why they were being hunted. Sundar nodded slowly. "And now that proof is still out there, probably hidden somewhere connected to the rings. The men after us. They want to erase whatever's left. The weight of what they'd just seen hung between them. They knew finding the rest of the truth wouldn't be easy. It might even be dangerous. But there was no going back. As they left the studio, Sundar noticed movement across the street. The man in the baseball cap stood by a lamppost, watching them with a faint, knowing smile. This time, he didn't bother to hide.